Imagine losing a child. Now imagine losing the same child, again and again and again. Not different children. The same soul returning to your womb only to leave once more, as if the world of the living were a place it refused to stay. This is the belief in Abiku, and for centuries it was one of the most powerful and painful ideas in West African spiritual life. In Yoruba culture, spanning what is now Nigeria, Benin, and Togo, Abiku were not simply children who died young. They were spirit children, beings caught between the world of the unborn and the world of the living, who entered families only to torment them with repeated cycles of birth and death. But here's what most people miss when they first encounter this myth. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't superstition for the sake of superstition. It was a framework, a way for communities to process unimaginable grief in a world where nearly half of all children died before the age of 5. And the rituals that grew around it were acts of desperate, fierce love. Today we're beginning a new series, Myths of the World, and we're starting here with a myth that will break your heart. The word Abiku comes from two Yoruba words, Abi, meaning that which is born, and Iku, meaning death, a child born to die. The name itself carries the weight of the entire concept. In Yoruba cosmology, the world is divided into 3 realms. The world of the living, called Aye, the world of the ancestors, called Rune, and a liminal space between them, a kind of spiritual waiting room where unborn souls gather. These unborn souls are part of a community. They have friends. They make pacts. And this is where the tragedy begins. According to the belief, certain souls in that pre-birth realm make a promise to their spirit companions. I will go to the world of the living, but I will not stay. I will return to you. These are the Abiku. They are born with an expiration date written into their souls, a covenant with death that no earthly love can easily break. When an Abiku child dies, the soul returns to the spirit realm, only to be sent back again, sometimes to the same mother, sometimes to another family. The cycle repeats. A woman might give birth to 3, 4, 5 children, all of whom die in infancy, and the community would recognize the pattern. This is the same spirit, coming and going. The grief was not just personal, it was cosmic. The family was caught in a spiritual tug-of-war between the living world and the realm of the unborn, and the child's soul was the rope. So how did a family know they were dealing with an Abiku? The signs were specific, and they were watched for with a vigilance born of terror. The most obvious indicator was repeated child death. If a woman lost multiple children in infancy, particularly if the deaths followed a similar pattern at similar ages, the community would conclude that a single Abiku spirit was cycling through her womb. But there were subtler signs too. Certain birthmarks were considered evidence. If a new baby was born with a mark in the same location where a deceased sibling had been intentionally scarred, and we'll get to why they were scarred, it was taken as proof that the same soul had returned. Unusual physical features at birth, particular temperaments, or being born with teeth were all potential markers. The Babalawo, the Yoruba diviner, a priest of the Ifa oracle, played a central role. Families would consult the Babalawo, who would cast the sacred palm nuts or opele chain and read the patterns. The Ifa divination system, one of the most sophisticated oracle traditions in human history, recognized by UNESCO as an intangible cultural heritage, would confirm or deny the Abiku diagnosis. And once a child was identified as Abiku, everything changed. The family's entire approach to that child, their name, their body, their relationship to the spiritual world, would be rewritten in an attempt to break the cycle. The rituals designed to keep an Abiku child in the world of the living were numerous, varied, and heartbreakingly creative. Every single one was an act of love disguised as defiance against the spirit world. The first line of defense was naming. In Yoruba culture, names carry immense spiritual power. Your name is not just a label, it's a declaration, a prayer, a spell. Abiku children were given names designed to shame them into staying, to trick the spirit companions waiting for their return, or to declare the family's refusal to let go. Names like Duroyaye, stay and enjoy life. Malatma, don't go again. Koskat, there is no hoe to dig a grave, meaning we refuse to bury you. Kuforiji, death, forgive this one. Each name was a plea wrapped in language, an incantation spoken every time the child was called. Then came the physical interventions. Small cuts or burns were made on the child's body. Deliberate scarification intended to serve a dual purpose. First, it marked the body so that if the child died and was reborn, the new infant could be checked for corresponding marks, confirming the return of the same soul. Second, it was believed to make the child's body undesirable to the spirit companions, as if to say, "Look, this body is damaged. It's not worth coming back for." Iron ankle rings were placed on Abiku children. Iron, in Yoruba cosmology, is sacred to Gun, the god of iron, war, and technology. Iron was believed to anchor the spirit to the physical world, to weigh it down, literally and metaphorically, so it could not slip back to the realm of the unborn. Some families went further. There are accounts of Abiku children whose bodies, upon death, were mutilated, a finger removed, a mark carved deep, so that when the spirit returned in a new body, the damage would be visible, and the family would know, "You came back, and we see you." Other accounts describe burying deceased Abiku children at crossroads rather than in family burial grounds, disorienting the spirit so it could not find its way back to the same mother. These were not acts of cruelty. They were acts of war. A family going to battle against death itself, using every spiritual weapon they had. To understand Abiku, you have to understand what life was like for families in pre-colonial and colonial West Africa. Childhood mortality rates were staggering. In some regions, estimates suggest that 40 to 50% of children did not survive to age 5. Malaria, measles, waterborne diseases, complications of childbirth, death was not an occasional visitor. It lived in the house. For mothers, the Abiku belief was both a curse and a strange kind of comfort. It was a curse because it meant that your grief was not random. It was targeted. A spirit had chosen your family. You were being haunted not by disease or misfortune, but by a soul that had made a pact against you before it was even born. But it was also a comfort, and this is the part that outsiders often fail to grasp, because if the child who died was an Abiku, then the death was not your fault. You did not fail as a mother. The food you gave was not wrong. The care you provided was not lacking. The child was taken by forces beyond any human's control. In a world without germ theory, without antibiotics, without any medical explanation for why your baby stopped breathing in the night, the Abiku framework gave grief a shape, a name, and, crucially, a set of actions you could take. You could fight back. You could consult the Babalawo. You could perform the rituals. You could name the next child with a name that dared death to try again. In the face of helplessness, the Abiku belief gave families agency. The Nobel Prize-winning Nigerian poet Wole Soyinka wrote a famous poem titled Abiku, giving voice to the spirit child itself. Must I weep for goats and cowries, for palm oil and the sprinkled ash? The Abiku speaks with contempt for the rituals designed to hold it, mocking the living for thinking they can chain a spirit. It is one of the most chilling poems in African literature, because it forces you to hear the myth from the other side. The Yoruba were not alone in this belief. Across the Niger River, the Igbo people of southeastern Nigeria had an almost identical concept, the Ogbanje. Like Abiku, Ogbanje were spirit children trapped in cycles of birth and death. The word itself means children who come and go, but the Igbo tradition added a crucial element, the Iyi-Uwa, a physical object, a stone, a piece of iron, a wrapped bundle, that the Ogbanje spirit had buried somewhere before being born. This object was the spiritual anchor, the covenant between the child and the spirit world, and the only way to break the cycle was to find it and destroy it. This created extraordinary scenes, families digging desperately in fields, under trees, near rivers, searching for the hidden Iua while the child lay dying. If the object was found and unearthed, the covenant was broken. The child would live. If it was not found, the child would die, only to return again. Chinua Achebe, arguably the most important African novelist of the 20th century, wove the Ogbanje concept into his masterpiece, Things Fall Apart. The character Ezinma, daughter of the protagonist Okonkwo, is identified as an Ogbanje. In one of the novel's most tense and moving scenes, the family digs for her Iiua and finds it. It is a scene that introduced millions of readers worldwide to this belief system for the first time. The parallels between Abiku and Ogbanje suggest that the belief may predate the ethnic divisions between Yoruba and Igbo. Some scholars argue it reflects a pan-West African cosmological framework, a shared understanding of the spirit world that stretches across the region, from the Akan people of Ghana to the Ewe of Togo. So what does modern medicine make of all this? The answer is more nuanced than you might expect. Sickle cell disease. It's the key that unlocks much of the Abiku mystery. Sickle cell anemia is devastatingly prevalent in West Africa. In some regions, up to 25% of the population carries the sickle cell trait. Children who inherit 2 copies of the sickle cell gene, one from each parent, develop sickle cell disease, which in pre-modern times was almost always fatal in early childhood. Here's the pattern. A couple, both carrying the sickle cell trait without knowing it, has child after child who dies in infancy from the same genetic condition. Same parents, same genetic dice roll, same outcome. To a community without knowledge of genetics, this looks exactly like the same spirit returning and dying repeatedly. The birthmarks that proved the child was the same soul. Sickle cell disease can cause skin lesions and marks. The age at which Abiku children typically died, between 6 months and 5 years, aligns precisely with when sickle cell symptoms become severe enough to be fatal. This doesn't diminish the Abiku belief. If anything, it reveals something profound, that mythology is not the opposite of science. It is often proto-science, a community's first attempt to observe patterns, identify causes, and develop interventions. The Yoruba saw the pattern. They named it. They built a framework to fight it. They were wrong about the mechanism, but they were right that something real was happening. Today, with genetic screening and medical treatment, sickle cell disease is manageable. The Abiku cycle can be broken, not with iron rings and scarification, but with hydroxyurea and blood transfusions. The spirit children are staying. The myth of Abiku teaches us something that no other myth in this series will teach quite as directly, that mythology is born from pain, not from imagination, not from boredom, not from ignorance, from pain, from the specific, unbearable pain of watching your children die and not understanding why. The Yoruba did not invent Abiku because they were superstitious. They observed a pattern, the same families losing child after child, and they built the most sophisticated explanation their knowledge allowed. They created rituals not because they were primitive, but because they refused to be passive. They fought death with names, with iron, with scarification, with prayer, and in doing so, they gave us one of the most emotionally complex mythological concepts in human history. A myth that is simultaneously terrifying and tender. A myth about spirits who refuse to live and parents who refuse to let them go. The Abiku are staying now. Medicine broke the cycle, but the myth remains, a monument to every parent who stood at the border between life and death and said, "Not this time. You're staying." Thank you for watching. This is the first episode in our Myths of the World series. If this story moved you, subscribe and hit the bell, because this is just the beginning. Next time we travel to Eastern Europe, to the world of Jewish mysticism, to meet a spirit that doesn't just come and go, it moves in.